Are we recording now?
Yeah,
I think that should be the new intro.
instead of the usual pop.
Yeah, instead of the usual pop, we just have like this long
heavy
sigh, gray, like it's like a grunt sigh.
The sound of us slipping into our easy chairs in Popstorian Studios.
Yeah, that's the sound.
Welcome
Welcome
to another Popstorian minisode. I'm Ben.
And I'm Chris. Last week we were talking about
French toast,
amongst other things. I was thinking more of the leading man, leading lady of awards of our current episodes. This question I have prepared kind of deals more of the future, maybe a little bit of the past, but mostly the future here.
That's the way we like it at the Popstorian podcast. Just a little bit of the past and some future too.
So here's the question here, Ben.
All right, I'm all ears in case you haven't noticed.
So, in your opinion, what decade had the best westerns?
Now, see, we've had a lot of conversations about this because, of course, we've had to pick.
Select the films.
We've had to select and one film from each decade, and that gets really hard when you get to the 40s, 50s, and 60s.
So that's why I limited this down to the 40s, the 50s, 60s, and the 70s.
Ooh, okay.
In these decades, of these 4 decades, which do you think is the best?
Best decade for westerns.
For westerns.
In my opinion, or
well,
I guess it has to be.
It is your opinion. You can use.
You're not asking me which decade
sources.
is my favorite.
No, I'm not.
You're asking me which one I think is the best.
As your opinion and as a filmmaker, as a producer of cinematic entertainment, which decade produced the best, most entertaining, best cinematically westerns?
So just for the sake of any new listeners who might be joining us for the first time, who haven't been listening to Westerns by the Decade since we did the Great Train Robbery,
which I don't know why that would
many
happen.
moons ago.
You can completely find all of them on Stitcher and Apple.
Yes.
You should totally
totally subscribe and download all of them.
Yes.
But if you haven't, quick rundown on some of the westerns that are in those decades. So 40s, we've got My Darling Clementine, of course.
We just did that. Yeah.
What are some others from the 40s? Top contenders.
Top contenders in the 40s. Red River, I would say, is probably one that we kind of mulled over.
That was definitely a close second for me.
Well, now you're going to make me pull up a list of westerns that we already looked through and said we're not worthy.
When you put it that way, it sounds very cruel.
Well, it also sounds very like we only picked the best westerns in our podcast, which I don't know if that can be really fair. I don't think that's necessarily the truth of it.
For the 50s, you've done
a great job, by the way, since you have been the one to have to choose most of these films. But there's some really great westerns that we didn't get a chance to cover.
I know, there's so many, in fact. Could almost do one for every year.
That is
Still
true.
have quite a few left over.
That is true. We could limit it more if you wanted to. All right, so
next series.
How about in the 40s? I'm going to give you some names so you can kind of think about it. It's
okay.
Red River, My Darling Clementine, the Oxbow Incident, Fort Apache, She Wore a Yellow Ribbon, The Three Godfathers, The Outlaw, Angel and the Badman, Blood on the Moon, Western Union, Dark Command, Virginia City, Along Came Jones, Tall in the Saddle, The Spoilers, Santa Fe Trail, The Return of Frank James, They Die With Their Boots On, Treasure of Sierra Madre, although that's more of a modern Western, maybe not the traditional Western that we think of. You've seen Treasure on the Sierra Madre, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
50s, we've got Rio Bravo, of course.
Right, that of course would be our
coming up
next episode.
The Searchers. Very well-known film.
High Noon. Which of course is the top 3 from the decade. Shane. The Man from Laramie. Winchester 73.
Anthony Mann.
Big Country. The Big Country. 310 to Yuma. Veracruz. Gunfight at the OK Corral.
And then in the 60s, of course, we have
The Good, the Bad, the Ugly. It's
and
1960s.
the other spaghetti western sort of start there.
Yeah.
We got Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid.
Magnificent Seven.
How the West Was Won.
Once Upon a Time in the West.
Mm-hmm.
A Few Dollars More.
Mm-hmm. What about the 70s?
For the 70s, The Outlaw Josie Wales. True Grit. No, True Grit is 1969, actually. So
or no, you're right. Right on the edge there.
The Shootist from the 70s.
And Rooster Cogburn, the sequel to True Grit. Katharine Hepburn.
Yeah, those are both 70s. The Cowboys was also in the 70s.
Oh, okay.
High Plains Drifters, 70s.
Okay.
Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid.
Mm-hmm. McCabe and Mrs. Miller.
Yeah. Little Big Man.
Mm-hmm.
Blazing Saddles.
An important film for the Western.
It is, actually. I wouldn't surprise if you wanted to do that one. Joe Kidd. Chisholm. 1970. Gotcha. That's a fun movie.
Yeah, so that gives you a bit of an inkling of what we're up against here.
Yeah.
I am going to come right out and say that I think probably the 50s.
The 1950s?
Is the best decade for the Western.
Yeah.
Now that's a pretty tall order and a hard choice. I feel like I have more knowledge of the Westerns of the 1960s.
60s and 70s.
But the 50s is kind of like a well-balanced decade. You get a lot of the old school Hollywood style Westerns still, if that's your thing. But there was also a lot of new ideas in terms of filmmaking, and a lot of filmmakers producing their most daring and their best work.
Yeah.
So you've got Anthony Mann coming into the Western world and really pushing the boundaries in terms of what was possible in those days. You've got John Ford exploring uncharted territory with The Searchers. And then, of course, Rio Bravo, which we're about to talk about. And then also the smaller black and white, kind of more psychological Westerns like High Noon and 3:10 to Yuma are some of my favorite Westerns ever. They're very smart and very well shot. The cinematography is very clean and beautiful and crisp.
Which I don't know, black and white just makes things look more crisp.
It does. It can be more... you get to play around with contrast more than I think you do when you're shooting in color.
Would you like to know what our followers on Twitter said?
I would very much like to know that. I feel like I should know already, since I work with our social media. But
I think I actually showed you this poll when I first put it on.
I've forgotten, I confess.
But I ended up getting 8 votes. So thank you if you remember this poll being out in like August or sometime. Thank you for voting.
Thank you for voting.
Your votes count. But it
very much.
Actually, it was the 50s got the most votes.
Oh wow! I was right in line with popular opinion, and I didn't even know it.
This runner-up was tied for the 40s and 60s.
Okay.
Both got 25%, and then of course the last place was the 70s. So.
Gotcha. Yeah, the 70s is a little bit of a difficult one, even though there were a lot of good westerns made in the 70s. It's a harder decade to
nail down, I guess. Yeah. I feel like there is a shift, though, starting in the 60s, but in the 70s you definitely see that. And we talked about this, I think, a little bit in an earlier episode. We were talking about what you could get away with as far as the code kind of going away.
Right.
And so
the rating system coming to power.
Experimenting a little bit more in the 70s as far as that goes. So that's why you got so much more violence and blood and things like that.
Right. What would be your pick? Do you agree with me and the popular vote, or do you have a different take?
I actually do agree with you as far as the 1950s. I feel like we have seen the genre go from very experimental film with The Great Train Robbery, and we see it grow and become a big box office hit, and we see it become very popular, particularly in the 30s, and then I guess in the 40s as well. By the 50s, it becomes, I think, the pinnacle of its art form as far as the Western goes. And then also kind of just preparing for this next coming episode of reading about the age of television.
Yes.
And so how that will affect
That will
major
impact
motion
the Western big time.
Big time, yeah. So the 60s will be see Hollywood competing with TV.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the 50s is it. I think that's the best.
What do you think, dear listener? Be sure to let us know.
Let us know if you agree with us.
You can't vote in the poll because it's closed, unfortunately.
I can repost the poll if people want it.
You want to reopen the poll? Let us know if
you want us to reopen the poll. Yeah.
Or just tell us directly what your thoughts are. We're on Twitter @PopStorian. We're on Instagram. We're on Facebook.
And
we're under the rock in your back garden.
That's scary. That's
terrifying, but true.
It's a horror film type thing. I feel like that's like it. In the podcast world, that's where clowns sitting in your backyard waiting under a rock.
Wearing cowboy hats, of course.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you for listening.
Yes, thank you very much, and we'll talk to you next time. You can't see, but I just saluted. I saluted all of you for listening.
And they salute you back then.